So again, it's Janice Dru-Bennett, and today is Sunday, August 22nd, 2021. Welcome, Liz and Joya. We are just starting the room on what does inclusion mean, and I have our Zoom open as well. Bobby, feel free to raise your hand and come up on stage. Hi, Joya. Did you want to?
Hi, Janice.
Yes.
Good to see everyone. Elizabeth, great to meet you as well.
Yes, and let me make you both, or I can make all of you moderators. Oops, I accidentally muted you, Liz. Can I unmute you? I'm still relatively new with Clubhouse, so let me. Okay.
Hi, Joya. Hi, Bobby.
And Peanut, welcome to the room as well. Feel free to raise your hand, come up on stage as well if you'd like to contribute. We are on Zoom as well, and I have someone else who had said she would call in on Zoom to be a co-host. Let me see if she's on. Yes, I'm going to allow her to talk. Do you want to introduce yourself on Zoom to the other people in the room?
Hi.
Yes, can you share your name and your where you're calling in from?
Well, my pen name is Melissa Green, and I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Greensboro, North Carolina. Yes, and I believe you've also shared that you're uniquely abled. Is that correct?
Yep.
And I do think that's an important thing as we discuss inclusion, is to think about all people who are differently abled, as well as different genders, races, all sorts of things. And I think, Liz, you were the one who said you really like to talk about inclusion. So I'd love for you to jump in first and kind of share your thoughts.
Hi, Janice. You know, things happen in crazy ways. I spoke with a cousin of mine today, whose brother, my cousin, died yesterday, and he had MS, and he had a very severe form of MS. And I was thinking about him as, you know, as I was thinking about this discussion about inclusion. He, you know, was a brilliant mathematician. He worked for Raytheon for many years, and his, you know, at the end of his life, he was quadriplegic, and he really did not have any voice anymore, and he was no longer employable. And, you know, he was on that spectrum, you know, to the far left or right, whatever that spectrum is, of being able. His brain was still brilliant. And I'm wondering, in situations like, how do we place a value, and how do we include people who are differently abled, who may not see, we can look at them and say there's nothing going on, but there's plenty going on. And I'm really glad that you brought that up as part of the conversation tonight.
Yes.
And I'm complete here.
Thanks, Liz. Joya, do you want to jump in with your introduction and some initial thoughts?
I'm going to come at diversity and inclusion from a slightly different lens, and I do appreciate, you know, the conversation that we're having about the abled and the disabled. I'm Indian. I'm born and raised American, so diversity for me has always meant being an Indian first generation that's straddling two cultures, parents who were very, very traditionally Indian, and raising American kids who favored, you know, their friends and the way, the Western style that my parents had elected to immigrate to and adopt. So I feel like diversity has been sort of baked into my DNA. And today, you know, my business is such that I run a leadership platform for executive women. But in its origins, I went to market championing only Indian women because I saw there was a real pain point in the market for this generation like myself that was growing up in a country where we had no real role models. And we also were taught to succeed in the home, not outside the home. So now all of a sudden we're in uncharted territory, wanting to become CEO, COO, and not really having space to have those conversations. So I created it. But I would say that diversity and inclusion really started to become the fabric of my conversations when many different people wanted to come to my programming and the kinds of speakers that I was interviewing. And they're like, oh, but I'm not South Asian. And I said, oh, that's okay. You're more than welcome to come to my events. And so as I've now rebranded I have been actively thinking about my website and how I make sure that all of the language on there is very inclusive. And how do I not dilute the fact that I still go to market championing a certain brand of Indian woman?
Thanks for sharing, Joya. Jennifer, I see you came up on stage. Did you want to contribute to the conversation? Or go ahead.
Thank you so much. Since I am just arriving, I'm going to listen in, but I'll be happy to chime in. I get a full understanding of what's going on, but I really appreciate the opportunity and I'm just happy to be here.
Absolutely. Welcome to the stage. And Bobby, I think you also came up on stage. Would love to hear your thoughts on inclusion as we kick off this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for those who don't know me, my name is Bobby Carlton. I'm the founder of a bunch of different companies, but I think for the purposes of this one, I'll choose the point of view that comes from the point of view of Innovation Women, which is my online speakers bureau. And Innovation Women was originally created specifically to address gender equity on stage. But over time, as we got deeper and deeper into that, you know, I got more involved in diversity and inclusion on stage. And partly that's because what we see on stage has so many impacts. You know, if you're on stage at a conference or an event and you are up there, you have instant credibility. You are considered a thought leader and an expert. And it really impacts how the audience and everyone in the audience sees who a leader is. So many of us have grown up with speakers being the same four old white guys that, you know, it's hard for us to break that out of our mental focus. When I'm talking about diversity and inclusion these days, I'm talking about it from so many different points of view. There is, as Liz was mentioning, the ability, which is also emotional and mental and physical ability. There's culture, cultural background, customs, languages, religious and spiritual beliefs, demographic characteristics, I think is where a lot of people focus diversity and inclusion conversations around ethnicity, but you can also be looking at age or gender identity, marital status, whether you had parents that were the parents who gave birth to you growing up, you know, socioeconomic status is huge as well. And then there's health. It isn't perhaps just limited to physical abilities, but it could be, for example, allergies and fatigue and hunger or other medical conditions. And then there's, you know, personal characteristics, happiness and learning preferences and needs and life experiences and connections. There's so many different ways to think about diversity and inclusion when you're coming from the point of view that I'm working toward, which is making sure that we have as many people on possible with different points of view and different identities so that people in the audience can identify with them. This is Bobby and I'm complete.
Thanks, Bobby. And Melissa on Zoom, do you want to share your thoughts on what does inclusion mean to you personally? Are you able to unmute yourself, Melissa, or chat?
Okay. Okay. So I'm blind and I also wear hearing aids. So that fits that. So that kind of fits as far as getting into the abilities and things like that, and then you get into accessibility and making sure that different things are accessible and inclusive, but inclusive also includes making sure the sites and websites are compatible with screen readers and different things. And so, and then of course, you know, like she was mentioning about, you know, the people, they decide our narratives, you know, not just the Black people, but people with disabilities. It's the people who don't have the disabilities that decide our stories and narratives and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay.
I was
So
just thinking, yeah, oops, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just wanted to throw that in there, that, you know, there aren't enough of our own narratives out there.
Yeah, and what you were just saying about not enough of our own narratives, I think that's what Bobby was also saying, making sure that we have a voice out there when a lot of us have not had a voice is part of inclusion. And I think something I read recently is we're thinking about diversity and inclusion is how diversity is a fact, but inclusion is an act. And what we do to make sure we're including others and giving a voice to all of us is part of the action that I think inclusion requires us to take. And personally, for me, inclusion is really important. I actually had taken the Gallup Strengths Finder years ago, and being an includer was my top strength. And I think for me, sometimes I think it can also be a weakness in that there are certain people who may not want to be included, or certain ways. And this is something thinking about like Joya and the group, and intentionally creating a safe space for a particular group, or kind of thinking about where people have not had a voice in the past, and how do we create inclusive, and in some ways not inclusive, or so I'd just love to hear the group kind of chat a little bit more about what does inclusion mean as it relates to your kind of, you know, creating a safe workspace environment, or creating groups that that include certain people or don't include certain people for certain reasons.
So I'll jump in here, because the way that I drive programming for my leadership platform today is 3 ways. I have peer mentoring calls, I have expert mentoring calls, and then I have live events. But at the peer mentoring calls, I've become very clear about the kind of woman I want in the room, and that's ethnicity agnostic. But I think the main thing that I'm after is diversity of thought. And I think Bobby had mentioned that earlier. You know, if you're going to be weighing in on somebody else's work challenge, for example, hey, I just lost my shit in a meeting, how do you keep from that happening again? I really think you need a lot of different women who have been in your shoes and are senior enough to be able to weigh in with sound advice. And I think that that's how I'm working to be more inclusive today, as opposed to thinking about it just being Indian women.
Thanks for sharing that, Joya. Bobby or Liz or Jennifer or Melissa, do you have any other thoughts around when you're including or not including others?
Yeah, you know, it might sound a little wonky, Janice, but going back to, you know, what do we consider inclusion? You know, who are our people? Because often I've worked with people and say, well, yeah, but we're not talking to everybody. And I think it's really important particularly in work situations where you have to get people to work in groups and be able to produce something together. But, you know, in life in general, getting some terms together that everybody can agree upon. And I think often we think we're including everyone, and we're not. We're making exceptions, we're making exclusions, and we don't even know, because unconscious bias is such a real thing. So I think earlier on, Bobby mentioned so many different groups of people, and what is often missing is the diversity of thought, or people who come from different backgrounds. And we don't know, sometimes looking at somebody, what their background is all about. We make assumptions about people. It's like we almost use the algorithms that, you know, the internet uses to make decisions about people and their capability to be included in a group without really having a conversation. So I believe that we have to have some more conversations about what that really means, and how do we go about opening people up and having the uncomfortable conversation that often accompanies who do we include and what does that mean? I don't really have any answers to that, but I just thought I'd raise the question. And having said that, I'm complete.
I will counter that by saying, I've heard some of my women say, when they're going and making a case to their company or to the higher ups about diversity and inclusion, the response is, well, why should we do this? Well, we get that, it's a mandate now and it's part of, social responsibility, but I need more than that. And so then the conversation turns to, what does diversity and inclusion actually do for the bottom line? And it's been shown that, when you have a diverse and inclusive workplace, you do have the ability to drive revenue. You have the ability to show that you're more agile, and you have the ability to innovate quickly. You've got the ability to recruit a more diverse talent pool, and you've also got the ability to retain that talent pool. So those are some of the things that we're having conversations about when you need to make a business case for diversity and inclusion.
And then
I'll jump in on that, Joya. Actually, that is one of the things that we talk to conference organizers about. We tell them that when they have more diversity and they have an inclusive event on stage, that will carry through off the stage as well. The more that you have on stage, the bigger your network is, the broader your reach, and the more ability you have to put butts in seats. If you as a woman or as any other underrepresented group go to a website and you see pictures from previous events, or you take a look at the speaker roster and you don't see yourself represented, do you have any desire to go to an event like that? It's one of those things where you say, that's not for me. Those are not my people. I also wanted to go back to something that Janice said, which is something that I struggle with a lot, which is sometimes I feel like I'm leaving people out because they are the people that are not interested in speaking. And public speaking is a huge fear for many people. A lot of people who are introverts will say, that's not the way that I want to represent. And so, one of the things that we've done is we've made Innovation Women more about the visibility. And yes, there's a lot of speaking involved, but helping to drive visibility overall really gets us a lot of those wins that we're trying to get to. So, my pandemic retail therapy was I bought a magazine over last summer. And now we have a way for people who are perhaps not as interested in speaking, a way for them to have a voice. They can contribute articles. It can help promote their books. So there's a lot of different ways to go about doing it. And I think sometimes we need to have more diversity of thought in our own efforts to actually deliver that diversity. So just thinking a little bit outside the box in terms of what it is we're doing. This is Bobby, and I'm complete.
Thanks, Bobby. And Melissa, I think you were going to speak up as well.
Oh, okay. So I was just going to say, now of course I lost my. So the other thing is, we are not consulted. Those of us who are not represented, we are not consulted as far as like when they make decisions. So like, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've kind of had to create my accessible path because not a lot of companies want somebody with a disability. Unless it's like a company that's already geared towards somebody with a disability, but a lot of the normal companies are not interested in working with someone who has a disability. And then with me having like contacting different companies about like their websites not being accessible and different things. So I'm doing consultant work, and I'm also interning for a lady who runs an entrepreneurship program for people with disabilities. And I've started a podcast, and, I'm wanting to basically represent the people with disabilities. And I mean, we are the people who solve problems, but then we are not necessarily the ones who are in the room when things come up, and so anyway.
Yeah, and something you said earlier, Melissa, was that decisions are being made without you being in the room. And you just said that again. And Bobby said, we don't want to go into an event where the speakers don't represent us. Well, same thing with companies. As we look at leadership teams, if the leadership team is not diverse and doesn't represent people of different abilities, people of different colors, then it doesn't feel like we'll fit into that company in some ways, is how I've perceived it.
Right. Yeah. So when I saw that this was the topic tonight, I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to stay awake and join this topic. This is my field of expertise. I might want to get in here.
Thank you for joining.
Melissa, I have a question for you though. When you say that companies don't want someone with your disability, do they say that? Like, how do they articulate that to you?
I mean, I've never experienced it, but I've heard situations where people, they go for job interviews, regular jobs that are not for people who have disabilities, and they go to maybe they don't necessarily mention to the person that they're going to have the interview with that they're blind, and so they call the company and maybe they're lost or the bus they can't find the place, and so they call the company to find out where it's at. And I guess the people, they give directions, but they give it to them like they're the ones driving. So then when they get to the place and then they walk in and it's I guess they look at them and they say, nope, sorry, we're not interested.
So you don't have any first-hand experience, though, and I'm sorry I'm being a little confrontational, but you yourself have never had somebody tell you, I don't want to hire you because of your disability, yes?
Nope, I haven't, but I mean, I know it exists.
No, but I'm just more curious about your story because you seem really convinced that this is happening, and I thought that maybe you had your own personal story to tell.
Oh, no, I don't, but I mean, I know it's out there. I just from, different podcasts and stuff that I've listened to just different stories I've heard. And then there was this one story I heard. The guy had some kind of issue where he wasn't able to do his work. I think he had maybe some issues with his legs, and they basically fired him and sent him home. They didn't want to accommodate him. I think he had asked for some accommodations, and they basically sent him home.
And Jennifer, I saw you unmuted as well. Did you want to contribute at all?
Yes, I did want to acknowledge, there were a lot of points that have been made, but just wanted to piggyback off of the intentionality of being inclusive. Being a servant leadership strategist, my whole goal is to be inspirational and motivational, whether I'm operating as a program manager, whether it's freelance consulting, because I want to be sure that when I'm around the table of diverse voices, that I'm intentional. And I recall one role in working for an organization that was very diverse, probably 40 members on the team. There were probably only 2 of us that was from the United States. And so what I found was really effective for me and as a global project manager in that role was really taking the time to get individual feedback from around the table of different aspects of the project, what that meant to them and their culture. Even if there was a holiday that we often had to, maybe once a week or once every other week, there may have been a holiday in the country, and just getting feedback on what that holiday was and what that means to them, and making sure as we develop the project that I would really be intentional about asking them, how would this work for you? Or on the other end, how can we better improve this so this is more acceptable in your culture? So I think intentionality is one word that I'm hearing that I really like, because it takes that effort to really step outside of your own experiences and look around the table to really invite those opportunities. I know personally, I have the last 5 years changed churches. So I now go to a church that has like 140 plus cultures. And that has really allowed me to really come outside of that comfort zone and say, okay, I'm being more intentional now of being inclusive and what that looks like. But it's definitely an intentional effort. So I can identify with a lot of what's being said, and just making sure that there's an effort to validate those who are around us is certainly important. And just not having that diversity around us, but making sure that we're including them by asking them and getting that feedback, to me, has been crucial. So that's what I wanted to contribute. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. And that really reminds me of thinking about different cultures as well. I mean, thinking about differently abled, but also differently cultured, and people who have different languages. And clearly, I'm only doing these rooms in English right now, and I'm doing it at an odd time that doesn't always include certain time zones. And so it's thinking about what does personal inclusion mean, and what does local, global, regional inclusion mean, depending on where you're at and what your goals are. I want to share my personal story around inclusion. I'm thinking about some professional feedback I had gotten at one point that I was being too inclusive, or that the way I approached work perhaps was not as nuanced, and in some cases perhaps being more selective in having one-on-one conversations, or kind of taking the approach with different cultures differently, is something that I continue to, I think, push myself toward, because I'm born in America, first generation. So I've got some nuances there that others may not understand, but I also know that I don't understand a lot of others. And to kind of really develop myself from a work perspective has been kind of pushing myself to think about, what does inclusion mean in the workplace, and when do I not feel included? And is it something that I need to raise my hand on, or is it something that means that, I don't need to be included in certain things? And I think inclusion, to me personally, has been like a growth word for me as I think about being an includer through the strength perspective, but also knowing that some people don't want to be included, and even thinking about emails and opt-outs. Like I always get a little knowing people opt out every time I send out an email. That's just part of marketing, and knowing that there's a certain percentage that don't want to be included is just knowing that there are different personalities, and different groups will adhere to each other in different ways, if that makes sense. Would love to hear each of your personal stories and what your thoughts are around work inclusion versus kind of global inclusion and everything in between, as we still have.
I'll
Joya.
weigh in on that.
Sure.
I mean, I heard just your last point that you made about people opting out of your emails, but I think, I've spent 20 years in television where people in an ivory tower were making decisions about my life and other people's. And I think now more than ever, the consumer, the user, is deciding what they do and don't want to listen to. So in a way, I think that things are more democratic than they have been in a really long time. Someone can elect to subscribe to your newsletter, or they can elect to subscribe out of your newsletter, and not one person is controlling that revolving door. If you're putting out content and your tribe wants you're looking for your tribe can come find you. And I think those barriers are down more than ever.
Absolutely. And that also makes me think of the word tribe, and how I've also heard pros and cons to the term of like tribal culture, or what does it mean to be part of a tribe or not part of a tribe. Liz, Bobby, Jennifer, Joya, Melissa, any of you have any thoughts on the term tribe as it relates to inclusion?
Well, when I think of
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So when I think of tribe, I guess, I think of like your group of people that you're with, that like they think sort of along whatever lines you think, and they, they help you with whatever you're trying to work on, and they network, like your group or your network. I guess that's what I think of, which can include, people from other countries.
Liz, you wanted to share something too?
Yes, I think of my tribe with much affection, and when people invite me into their tribe, I am always flattered and thrilled and excited about that. Maybe, it takes on, there are other meanings to it, and sometimes there are scary meanings to it. But in all, I think, to be tribal is one thing, to be included in a tribe is another. And I think going back to, what a few people have said is that we try to include as many people as we can. And there might be, criticism, you're including too many. I'm not really sure that's for somebody else to decide. Maybe if it's a private club, you get to decide who you're going to allow in. But I love the idea that we can belong to a tribe, and the tribe can be varied and beautiful. And it doesn't have to be about one particular thing. I think it just might be people who are coming together for a common purpose.
When I think about tribe, I think about coming together because we share the same values.
Yep.
And again, it's ethnicity agnostic, but it's really just having the same values. And that doesn't mean that that person may or may not challenge me. I want them to challenge me, but I also know that they're going to be my ride or die friend. But our values are what kind of brought us together.
Liz, this is Liz, Joya. I completely agree with that. It really is a coming together of values. And if I took anything away from the year and a half holed up in the bat cave, it was that I met so many people who were coming together with a common purpose, who were on that same wavelength and sharing a certain number of values, and also being able to say, yeah, we disagree on this, but we agree we still want to be in the same room together. And that becomes very important too. Like, how much can you tolerate somebody who disagrees with something that you either say or believe in, and still maintain the integrity of the relationship? And I'm complete there. Thanks.
Okay, my turn to jump in on this one. I stopped using the word tribe. It was actually never a word that I really identified much with anyway, but I use the word community more than anything. And I talk about community building and the sense of community, because I know some of the uses of tribe are objectionable to some people. They think about tribe, especially with African Americans, and they talk about tribe being a word that promotes this sense of primitive, and the general sense of tribe is really that sense of the word. Also, you get American Indians and natives, and it really starts to be just a problematic term. And so a lot of people that I know have stopped using tribe for that reason. This is Bobby, and I'm complete.
Thanks, Bobby. And that's part of what I was kind of alluding to when I said sometimes tribe may have a negative connotation, and at the same time, it's also got this very positive bringing together. And I do really like the word community, connections, groups, and part of thinking about the word tribe is also thinking about the word survival, and how we came together into tribes to protect each other, or families. And so that's almost part of like feeling safety within a tribe is part of where I think that word also resonates a bit with me in thinking about whether I call the people who follow me or who I follow, if I'm part of their tribe or they're part of my tribe. But again, I do really like the word community as well. And also thinking about survival and kind of our natural instincts. I've been learning a lot about the brain and how many different thoughts we have every day, and how we do kind of take shortcuts with our brain. And that's where I think about the unconscious bias that you brought up earlier, Liz. And I think it would be great to dive deeper into unconscious bias, or bias that might be we might know about, and how do we solve for that problem, or how are you solving for it, or are we, or like, how do you see others solving for unconscious bias?
Janice, it's Liz. May I share a quick story about a friend of mine who she just returned to school for her master's in expressive therapies, and she's somebody that I have known for 30 years. The facts that I know about her is that her father was stationed in South Korea, Italian American, originally from Italy, married a Korean woman. She clearly looks Asian. And she went back to school, and the first thing that they discovered, they talked about was unconscious bias to start the program, and that everybody has it. And she said she discovered about herself that she has never identified as Asian. She looks much more Asian, and she has never considered herself Asian. It's not even American, but the Caucasian is how she identifies. And she was just really gobsmacked at, like, how could I get this wrong? I mean, she clearly knows that, she has a parent from Korea.
Right.
And still had this, like, identity, confusion. And so she started off, she called me and she said, I can't believe that I have this unconscious bias about myself. And it really got me thinking, like, how much of that do we do, really well intentioned, and we want to do the good thing overall, but how many of us are getting it wrong just because we have a misunderstanding about what is. And that's all I really had to say about that. I hope that was helpful in some way to share. And I'm Liz, and I'm complete.
Yes, thanks for sharing that story, Liz. And I do think telling our personal stories or stories that we've heard does help us better understand what inclusion means. And welcome to the room, Denise. We're talking about what inclusion means to us personally through telling different stories and sharing our thoughts around unconscious bias. What does it mean to be part of a tribe or a community? And professionally, how it's impacted us, as well as what kind of actions we might be able to take going forward. Jennifer, did you want to speak?
Yes, I want to first chime in on the tribe, and then I'll go into the training that I've actually had on inclusion. But as far as the tribe, I think of a compassionate group I'm a part of, where we've come together and meet. In this pandemic, it has meant so much because we meet really Monday through Saturday. There's an intentional time. And when you think about a group that's just as many on the West Coast as it is the East Coast, there is a time where we are together live, but the moderator does make sure that recording is available so that those that are not able to attend while it's live. But it's a great group. Mostly women, but it's there are some men who are also a part of it. So there is no exclusion of it, but we are all connected around a common theme. And so when I hear the word tribe, it certainly gives me positive vibes because it's something very unique and special. Again, because it's during these pandemic times when we've not been able to be around our normal friends and spend as much time, but to have this group that I meet with every morning, I think very compassionately when I hear the word tribe. So I'm really driven by the tribes I'm a part of because we are connected around a common theme, and we can share and have that group there in good and in bad times. So I really appreciate that opportunity. As far as actual bias, I have actually had a training. I don't know how many of you have had this corporate training on bias, and I really appreciate it because that was the organization I was part of in the global project manager role that I talked about earlier. But I thought the training was great, really allowing you to see different cultures and being able to look at that picture and image and really say what first comes to your mind, and then going back and validating that through different questions, I thought was really great. And I think more organizations need to do that and probably build upon that particular effort. I think it was more of an entry-level type effort to be able to identify what that bias is, but I certainly think it was a great start. I think by the time I took it, I think I probably left the organization within a couple of months, so I don't know if they continued that effort. But I have been a part of something like that. You don't really realize, what biases you may have until you've really been introduced to something that formal to really say, when I saw this image, this is what I originally affiliated with that. And then going through a series of questions to really make you question, that was very helpful for me. So that was my opportunity to be able to identify bias.
Jennifer, I often wonder how easy it is for people to participate in employee resource groups. I do a lot of public speaking at different corporates, and when I walk into a room, if I'm been hired to speak to the Asian American Pacific Islander group, everybody in the room is Asian American Pacific Islander. And I wonder how much of that programming is made available to other people to have the brand of conversation that you're talking about.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Joya, and Jennifer too, for sharing your thoughts on bias and a tribe. And I think often we gravitate toward groups that look like ourselves. And I think it's not always shared across multiple groups. And I think that is part of bringing together ERGs to have shared conversations as well. I think that's something that a lot of companies don't always do. And I've been part of ERGs at large companies, and often we don't kind of cross-pollinate. And I think that is one way to potentially create greater inclusion and diversity and, bring together diverse actions. And Denise, I'd love for you to introduce yourself too and share what inclusion means to you if you're able to speak.
Yes, I am. Thanks so much for bringing me up. And Brandon is down in the audience. He'd be amazing too. He's a excellent speaker on inclusion when it comes to issues around disability. But I am an inclusion strategist. So literally I go into organizations and help them match the walk to the talk. Right? I'm the one that comes in and helps them really figure out what it actually looks like and what you actually have to do. And for me, inclusion is constant renegotiation. That's what I see us in the process of right now. We are renegotiating what behaviors are acceptable. What does it mean to be professional? What does it mean? Who's smart and who's not? And how do you assess these things? These are things that have been set in place by standards and norms that, quite frankly, are archaic. And we've gotten to a space that we're ready to release some of them. But it's really difficult to release old stories that have, especially if they've served us, right? So to me, inclusion and the quest for inclusion is around this renegotiation process and redefining the rules together. There's nothing that says that because you're disabled, you can't do this job as well as anybody else. There's nothing that says that because you came from a certain neighborhood or went to a certain school that you don't have the capacity to learn and achieve just like anybody else. And not only do we have to allow for that, but we have to consciously remove the barriers that have created these situations, right? And there are many. And some of them have been intentionally put in the path of actual authentic inclusion. And so the work is not down the street. The work is at our house, right? It's in our jobs. It's in our circle. It's 5 feet around us as we look at the places and spaces where our quote unquote normal behavior is now going to have to be renegotiated. And the courage around that can't be undersold, right? It takes a lot to say, I remember when my daughter was in ballet as a child, and her group was getting ready for a recital, and they sent a note home that said all the girls were being asked to put their hair in a tight, severe ballerina bun. Well, my daughter could do that, but there was another little Black girl in the group and her hair couldn't do that. So what does it mean when your best dancer can't dance because of an arbitrary rule that people weren't thoughtful enough to examine and remove? Right? That's the work. That's the work of inclusion on a day-to-day basis, to find the places that we've set up arbitrary hurdles that stop our best dancers from dancing and stop people from having the opportunity to try new things, to touch and experience. And so there's a temptation to make inclusion the big evil person down the street, that's the big corporate whatever, the big, even when we talk about police or we talk about systems, I believe in systemic discrimination, systemic bias. I believe in all of that. But I think the danger of always centering the conversations on the big system is we forget to do the work that we need to do, that each and every one of us has in our capacity to create change right now, today. So that's my definition of inclusion. Thanks so much for bringing me up.
I'm going to piggyback on that for a second because I'm somebody who has been, slotted as probably the diversity ad and a workforce. But I think that where things fell short is that I didn't see the sponsorship and the mentorship that comes with placing me there. So in other words, to sort of dovetail out of what you just said, it's not enough to just tick a box and say, okay, we've hired a minority woman, our work here is done. I think that there needs to be an active and intentional sponsorship and mentorship of that person to make sure that they succeed in the job that they've been placed in. And that's something that I personally can say that sometimes I look around and I saw other people getting introductions and sponsorships and mentorships. And I was like, well, why not me?
Right. It's a great undoing, right? Like we have done harm as a society, as a culture. We have done harm to certain groups. We have. So it's owning that and saying, not just, okay, let's just start from today and move forward. that can't be what we do, right? There has to be some undoing, some corrective action. And we have to have the courage and the intellectual curiosity and the sincerity around doing that undoing work, that renegotiation work. I couldn't agree with you more, Joya. Perfect example. You can't just add a person into a space and throw them in and say, okay, good luck. You have to do the work of truly grafting them in. You can't be intentionally exclusive for decades or centuries and then be accidentally inclusive. We need the same level of intentionality around really grafting new people into these old spaces, right? And that's going to take commitment on all the parties involved.
But as a business owner today, where, I have to be hyper aware of my bottom line, that's time out of, now that I'm on the other side, and I have a team that is answerable to me, I have to make sure that I take time out of my schedule and take my eye maybe off the bottom line to be able to make sure that I'm touching base with each team member, making sure they're okay, making sure that they're getting out of the experience what they had hoped for. And, you have to be intentional about that too. But then who picks up the slack, when that hour or so has been spent doing that check-in, then that's like, there's an opportunity cost as well. So I see both sides of it.
Well, but I would disagree. I would push back on that because I think that if we think of being sensitive to diversity and being truly inclusive, is we see that as a cost center. As we move into the next century, I think we've missed the boat. The opportunity, the cost, the potential lies in so many communities that may not even be our customers yet. You don't want to make mistakes. How many companies have we seen make horrific mistakes, some of which closed their companies down because they did not have one diverse person on their staff to say, no, don't do that. Like there is a strength in having diverse people on your team, having different perspectives, getting out of groupthink, right? Getting a group of people that can help you challenge your assumptions. If we see that as a strength, one of the challenges that we continually see it as a cost center instead of seeing it as a strength. And that is, in my opinion, that's a short-sighted way to look at it. And that's really what I've got to do when I go into clients in corporate spaces and show them the ways their thinking is so siloed and so repetitive that I have clients that they've only hired from the same school for the last, 10, 20 years. Imagine getting every single new employee from the same program, like the same exact school. That is bananas. How are you having new ideas, new creativity, new options being brought to the table if everyone has been trained exactly the same way by exactly the same people? So I see inclusion as a strength. And so learning about that is only going to make you a better, stronger business, especially as we go into the next 10, 20 years.
Sure, and I make an effort every week to make sure I'm having dinner with somebody who doesn't look like me, doesn't think like me, because to me, that's actually putting my actions into reality, because I think that that's how I learn and how I grow. But the point I'm trying to make is I can see how there are people that need a business case to be made for diversity and inclusion, because there is, at the end of the day, a survivability and a bottom line consideration that also has to be made. And there's some people that only hear the numbers. And so I'm just saying, for more widespread adaptation, I feel like the business case and the numbers always have to be sort of in tandem with all of the other items as well.
And I'd love to jump in here. And I think, Joya, you said earlier too, that you want diverse perspectives in the groups you've built in the company. And I think diversity, there's research showing how diversity and inclusion leads to better business decisions and improved bottom line. And clearly it's great that we have differences of opinion and may disagree on certain points, or maybe it's even really digging deep into what we're actually saying. Because I think sometimes we disagree on things when we're not even on the same, at the same point on the ladder, or the ladder of inference, if you've ever heard of that, in terms of giving each other feedback and making sure we're even talking about the same thing when we agree or disagree with each other. I would love to include some of the other people who are on stage to share their thoughts on what inclusion means for them. And I usually like to keep our rooms just to an hour or a little bit over. So we've got about 10 minutes left here. And so Brandon, Kara, and DJ are next. If anyone else wants to raise their hand, let's give a minute or two to each person. And I usually like to also end a room with sharing one key takeaway or one thought or one action you might want to go away with. So Brandon, why don't you jump in with your thoughts on what does inclusion mean to you? And then we'll move around the room and wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so.
Hi, Janice. Thanks so much. And Denise, as always, my friend, I am cheering literally every line that you say. It's just so spot on. And I want to reiterate one of the points that you hit home on, that it's not just about the top down where change needs to incur. I firmly believe it is from the bottom up, and really on all levels, that we all have some form of responsibility and obligation to use our voice and use the perspective that we have, no matter what we think the preconceived notions or the boxes that we might be in that differ us from others. There is so much value in speaking our truth. And I know that firsthand, being somebody that is under multiple marginalized identities, but the one that I'm most proud of is being disabled. And I firmly believe that we need to take a step back to what DEI really is, because the craziest part to me is that it's 2021 and the world's largest underrepresented/minority group, which is the disabled community, is excluded from nearly 90-something% of all company/organizational inclusion efforts. And that makes me really sad. And I also see, because of the position that I'm in, by being invited by so many companies to come in the 1 month that they decide disability is relevant to them or to their company, it's just so, I think it proves that they don't have an actual commitment to what the need of humanity is, because you can't deny the fact that over 1 billion people all over the world have a disability. And then from the other side of where I see improvement need to be made is from an age perspective. As somebody who is a Gen Zer, I'm 21, there is such a disconnect between my generation and a lot of the older generations. And I think it comes from a place of not understanding each other. But it's, to me, as simple as having the ability to converse and understand that there is wisdom, there's value in the other person, no matter where they come from, what their life experience is. And we have to do our part to consciously make that happen. And that is on all fronts, from a personal level and, of course, on a business level. And it's very disappointing to see that in a couple of years' time, my generation is going to take up the majority of the workforce and then the voting power and all these things. And to deny the fact that young people, of course, have a say and have such immense power to create change, but also what we can do together to co-create solutions for a better world. That's something that I'm obsessed with. I'm so passionate about really helping people understand that it is not something where we have to change everything for everything to change and to experience different results. Sometimes it's as simple as extending a seat at our table and passing it on to somebody that doesn't have the same level of opportunities or the microphone as often as we do. And I think that is how we're going to make the greatest waves towards true equity and inclusion. We have a very long way to go. So thanks again for having me up.
Thanks so much, Brandon, for coming up. And I appreciate your bringing up age as well. And I think about children and how kids often aren't given a voice or are told to be quiet. And younger generations have different perspectives as older. And I think including all types of perspectives, whether it's age, personality, gender, race, it's the full gamut. Differently abled, Melissa's here on Zoom listening in and contributed earlier as well, and mentioned, her blindness and hearing aid and needing to and not being included in decision making. So that's certainly something that having a voice and including more people in the decision making process will help make a better future for all of us. Kara, would you like to speak up and share your thoughts on inclusion and what it means to you?
Sure. Thanks, Janice, for having me. And Brandon, I really appreciated your perspective there. Just super quick, I came in a little bit late to the conversation, but one thing that comes to mind for me is thoughtfulness. And so whether that's for me working with clients or building a team, is always taking that second to think about things, whether that's before you're making a decision, before you're having a conversation, before you bring someone on, and just making sure that we are having those conversations, because there's always going to be spots, blind spots or things that we're missing and things that we're not seeing, whether that's because of our perspectives or our upbringing and just kind of the culture that we're in. Where there's a lot of things that we're going to miss that other people bring to the table. And so just kind of always keeping that at the forefront and making sure that we are thinking about that and inviting those conversations, because a lot of times I think people are not going to necessarily bring that up, especially if they are in the minority or the only one in the room. That's a difficult position to put someone in. And so making sure that we're bringing that conversation up and opening that up in a way that feels comfortable. And it's not always going to be perfect, but I think if the thoughtfulness is there and the conversation is open, then I think that's really where we can begin.
Thanks, Kara. And absolutely, being the only person in the room is very difficult, and having to grow that momentum once there are more different people within one room, it does make a huge difference. DJ, do you want to jump in as well with your thoughts on what inclusion means?
Sure thing. I think as far as inclusion is concerned, in my personal opinion, it means being welcoming it means being welcoming even in those moments where things kind of make us cringe, you know what I'm saying? And making sure that we're not like shutting other people down, even if we vehemently disagree with them, and not based off of what's on the inside or the outside of the person. And so that's just my particular perspective on it. I do wish to say that I often do fear where our society is headed, and I am grateful that I don't have to live in. And this might be one of the more selfish things, but I am grateful that I won't have to live through the society that I see this world going into 60 years from now. And so I'm just grateful, and oftentimes I'm not exactly sure if we understand in the moment what are the long-term implications of our actions. But needless to say, whether you choose to live by a preconceived Bible or whether we all decide that we're going to, invent our own as we go along, I do believe that diversity and inclusion, and in and of itself, it's intrinsically within the beliefs, encompasses accepting all people and finding value in everybody, regardless of what they look like on the inside or out.
I love that, DJ, accepting all people, no matter what they look like in the inside or out, and finding value in humanity and people. So let's wrap up this room by going around with one key takeaway. Liz, you want to jump in?
There have been so many words about talking and having conversations. And I would say my take will be curious. And I think sometimes if you have had a place at the table, it's up to you, it's up to me to say, hey, I see you sitting on the sidelines, come on in. I think that if you have been in that comfy place, you actually need to be the person to step up and invite somebody in. So with that, be curious, let people know that you're seeing them and you're hearing them, even if it feels uncomfortable to do so at first. Balance some of that curiosity with sensitivity, and just ask people what they want, what they're about, and hopefully address them in the way that feels right to them. And I'm complete. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Melissa, are you able to share a key takeaway?
Okay, well, I don't know. I guess my takeaway is, keep doing with what I'm doing. Keep going in the direction I'm going.
Yeah. Keep speaking up and sharing your thoughts around diversity and inclusion, Melissa.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby?
I'll just make it quick. I think today is another opportunity that I've had to listen and learn. So keep listening, folks. You will learn something new every time. I'm complete.
Thanks, Bobby. Jennifer?
I think for me, listening to Melissa and the practitioner insights from Denise lets me be more intentional about these areas that have been excluded, when we should be more intentional about including some of these very areas. So those have been some of the most eye-opening to me, to make sure in my desire to be more intentional in inclusivity, that I'm thinking about these areas where there have really been more exclusion in than inclusion. So it's been a great conversation, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Denise?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that inclusion in a lot of ways is like a stadium. If everybody drops a piece of paper, that stadium is a wreck. But if everybody bends down and picks up a piece of paper, it's remarkably clean. And I think we have to stop expecting certain people, certain groups, certain practitioners, certain job titles to do the job of cleaning up and picking up, but instead see how every one of us has a responsibility to be a part of the cleanup of this big stadium we call our country. It's all of our jobs. Thanks.
Thanks, Denise. And Kara, do you have a key takeaway?
Sure. I'm with Bobby. Keep listening and learning and unlearning for sure.
And DJ? I don't know if you're able to speak, DJ. It sounded like you were in a crowded room when you spoke last. And if you're not able to unmute yourself, I would say that my key takeaway from this session is that there's just so much to learn and talk about and do to and undo around inclusion. And I hope that we'll connect, further and beyond talking, start doing and figuring out what additional actions we can take, like what Liz said about, or what Joya said about meeting someone different every day, or whatever it is that we can do individually or collectively to further, the discussions around inclusion and to create more of an inclusive world. So thank you all for joining tonight, and hope that we can connect and talk further. We're on here every Sunday night at 9 p.m. talking about social impact issues, different topic of discussion every Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So feel free to come back, and thank you all for joining and for listening and contributing. I'm gonna close out the room now. Bye, Melissa.
Hey there.
I'm gonna close out the room now. Yep. Thank you so
All
much
right.
for joining.
Yep.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.